Hi, welcome to the Techruiter Talks to podcast series. This is our first podcast from Techruiter. Techruiter is a brand new business set up last month to solve a number of challenges in the tech recruitment industry, set up by myself, my colleague Richard Gell and Max Blake, where previously we helped scale up organizations like Babylon Health, G Research, Shipstead, 5AI, and now we're here trying to solve tech recruitment on a pretty significant scale. Part of our strategy is to launch this podcast series where we talk to industry leaders across the product and tech space to get some really valuable insights. Today, we are speaking to someone I worked really closely with at Shipstead, Christian Miccio, who is a well-known product leader who spent many years at Shazam as the early founding team, also helped Google launch key features on Gmail, Google Maps, worked in a bunch of leadership roles, and founded his own business. So welcome to Christian.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Cool. So I guess it'd be good to hear a little bit more about your story as a tech product innovator, entrepreneur in the industry. How did you get into the tech and product space to begin with?
So that's an interesting one. I mean, I'm one of those kids born in the 70s, discovered computers in the 80s, and it was love at first sight, basically. And so I went through, owning a Commodore 64, then coding on an Amiga, and so you learn coding from magazines. There wasn't really a lot of internet to go by, and then I automatically ended up coding. For me, it wasn't even it wasn't a question. I just ended up coding as doing computer science and coding commercially, and then I guess I got lucky at some point because we were in touch with we got put in touch with the founders of Shazam. There was 3 engineers out of Munich, actually, where I was working in Munich on commercial software, and the first thing I saw was the demo. So I saw the demo from the one founder who designed the algorithm. And to be honest with you, it's one of those things where you think, okay, this is rigged. It has to be rigged. It's impossible that this actually works. And so you try to get a grasp of the mathematics and you think, does this really work? And so I caught the bug. I caught the startup bug, the entrepreneurial bug, I think, at that point. And I just sold my car. I let go of my flat and I moved to London for to join Shazam on their first funding round. So I was employee number 2, 3 or whatever, the people who signed up on this first wave of financing. So the interesting experience was that we had to solve a lot of problems on the technical front. So I was still on the software engineering side at that point. I was one of the tech guys coming on board to build the system. And the interesting challenges were that there were some challenges that are not challenges anymore today. For example, how can we get 2 servers in the data center? Well, there wasn't anything to rent back then. You couldn't just put your credit card out and rent two machines on Amazon. You had to go build the stuff yourself, right? Then there was the other problem where we thought, right, Shazam is not a recognition engine per se. It's actually a comparison engine, right? So it needs the data to be stored somewhere. And so you need to fill a database with music. So you need to read the music, get the digital fingerprint out of the music, and then it's stored and it can be compared against whatever's coming in from your real time, your phone. So you're somewhere in a cafe and you stream the sound, and then we find the music in there. So given that it's a comparison engine, we needed a music database and one that we could refresh every week with music. And so one of the interesting numbers from back then is that there was 200 pieces of music being published per week in London, which was really interesting for us when we were researching, what kind of bandwidth do we need to support in terms of...
because something like that, where you're trying to build a catalog of music, essentially a music library, like how do you start? Do you focus on one city, one region? Do you focus on a particular genre? Because it's obviously such a big problem and you can just get wowed and amazed by the problem space. And
exactly. So we start... Yeah, so we started with London, and we started with what we could get our hands on through publishers, and so we had a huge back catalog as well, and all the current pop, very popular stuff, pop, funk, hip hop, whatever was on vogue in 2001 and 2. We had a really good catalog by launch, but that's what we focused on, and so we had a deal with some publishers, some distributors, some different companies that had CDs going through. And we literally had to read CDs and create digital fingerprints from all the music and enter the metadata from the covers. So people would type type up the artist, type up the title of the song while the CD was being encoded.
Oh, wow. So you were actually digitizing CDs?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we had to. So we basically could not find a digital database that existed in a format that we needed.
And how did the product idea get created? Was this idea already in place when you got there, or did you actually help flesh out that idea as a product manager? Or
So the idea was from the founders. So this idea existed, and they'd been researching this for a while. So one of the founders, so there are four founders at Shazam. Three of them are more on the business side, one of them on technical side. And so they together were the originators of the idea and the algorithm to find a piece of music amongst millions of pieces of music. And so they had the first technical prototype going, the idea and the technical prototype going, and they were just fundraising when I met them basically. So I jumped on board the already existing idea.
And I guess that must have been a fascinating journey, those first 3 years of business so early that now obviously got acquired by Apple. It is such a well-known, established unicorn out of the London.
It was. It was. I'll be honest. When I joined Shazam, even your family tells you, hey, it's great that you're doing this adventure while you're young. But we have a room back home in case something goes wrong. You can always come back. And so the amount of trust that people throw at you is not exactly enormous when it's a completely unknown company. So people now say, with hindsight, they say, yeah, hey, awesome. But imagine it's four guys in a meeting room and who are telling you, yeah, we're going to build this, but it's not built yet. And it's not a known name. We have this name, but we think it's great, but it's not a brand, right? It doesn't exist. So I think the perspective of joining a team that is absolutely at the start is something where you need to be sure of what you're doing, right? You need to be sure that this is something you want to do and not, and enjoy it, right? And so, because a lot of people are going to tell you with the early stage, especially, that, oh, why don't you go for a regular salary? Why do you do this? Blah, blah, blah. So, if you're young, it's a good opportunity to do it if you don't have a burn rate yet, like kids in school or something.
Yeah, but you've got to be committed to the space that you're going into. It's not just a startup for the sake of startup, because nowadays you see a lot of people wanting to work in startups just because it sounds cool.
Yeah, so I interviewed several people, even when I did my own company, who said, particularly one I remember said, yeah, I want to move to London. I said, okay, great. I need people in London. I do backend. I'm like, yeah, great. I need a backend guy. And the salary I could pay was a certain number. And he says, oh, wow. I mean, that's what's written on your website, I said, yeah, that's what's written on the website because that's what I can pay. And so then he said, well, but, I've interviewed with a bank and they're paying me double. And I said, yeah, okay. So, be happy at the bank and enjoy your life. And he wanted basically me to extend the salary. And I said, but I can't. I literally can't. I'm a startup with a certain amount of funding. The whole runway is, 2 years, and it will only work out if I can pay that salary, which is the price you pay when you go to startups, is that, you don't earn as much as the banks, but the work is much more exciting.
Of course,
so there are these trade-offs, right? When you think about where to go as a job, there are these trade-offs.
Yeah, and the learnings you take from a startup, because obviously, and I'm in this space of hiring where we're having to battle against where people want to go work in a startup to take those learnings, but then they're countering it against having an offer at a more established company, which is 20-30% more higher. And it's that realization of, well, if you go to this early stage startup, the learnings you're going to get there for the first year or 2 years, your career trajectory from going into an early stage startup versus a more established business where you become a cog in a wheel, it's two different spectrums.
Exactly. So I was 27 when I joined Shazam, and what was interesting is all the problems we had to solve. So we had to create a music database, and we're not even talking about something that's there and you just need to do a little bit of work. We had to figure out how to do it, right? We didn't know if we could get CDs. We didn't know if we could build machines and encode them. We didn't know if it would work out that we had people typing up the names while they were encoding it. So we had no idea. The other piece is that the iPhone, for example, came out in 2007. So nowadays everybody's used to use Shazam through an app, but at the time we didn't have an app. So there was only phones or feature phones as they call it. But all you could do is basically call a number and the music would be recorded. But we didn't know how to pick up a phone. We didn't know how to pick up a phone call. So we figured it out, right? We used the same systems as banks were using. So when you call somewhere and the phone gets picked up and it says, hey, hello, welcome to blah, 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 press 1 for this, press 2 for this. And so we literally used the same systems and recorded sound, ran it through our crunching engine of digital fingerprinting, and then compared it to the database. And that's how we did it. Then we learned how to send SMSs, et cetera, et cetera. So we had to basically figure it out. And so if you're, if you're quite young and you're learning, this is incredible. So at the end, you're capable not just of figuring out the technology, figuring out a particular language, or figuring out optimization in one particular setting, but you're actually able to put together systems from scratch that you did not know you could. So you start thinking outside of the box. You start thinking, how are we going to communicate with these systems over there? What are these systems going to do exactly? How can we make it robust? What are the usual failing points in our whole architecture? If we have 10 different things that are happening in the system, we have these that are, we need to solidify them. How can we do that? How can we make sure that this always responds to the user in a given amount of time, within the 20 seconds, and that there's no bottlenecks as you grow, right? And so there's so many different things that you learn that definitely the experience is extremely valuable.
Yeah. It's that innovation, right? Where you're having to figure out the entire ecosystem. You're not just building a new feature and
exactly
just launch it.
Exactly. So if you go to a big commercial company, which I did at the start, what's extremely valuable there is that you have more guidance. Is that your scope of work is automatically a little bit more restricted because you work on one feature, you work on one dialogue, or whatever it is, that the first thing that you get on board with. But the interesting bit there is that you get more senior people who are around who you can learn from. So there's a little bit more comfort in that sense, because you have people that you can lean on. You have people you can go ask. You can just get up from your desk and go ask someone, hey, what about this? What do you think of that? It's much simpler, right? So it's less daunting as a challenge. So it depends what you want. I mean, personally, I went for the first 2 years, through a commercial company where I learned a lot about big architectures, about big apps that are working on different systems, communicating, big systems with overnight interest rate calculations, which today is very quick, but used to be a thing back then. And so you have more guidance on the startup. You have more challenge, but you have somehow, if you like that, you have more satisfaction and you learn faster. You may not learn as structured, right? In a structured way, but you learn a lot more things.
Yeah,
I would say.
So how successful did Shazam get? How big did they get in terms of a size? By the time you left.
By the time I left, it wasn't very big in user numbers because it was very early stage. But we had, for example, I think we had more than 100,000 CDs in the system. So it was a sizable thing, right? But the real takeoff on the user front from Shazam was when the iPhone came out. So the iPhone came out, and a good friend of mine, Rahul, built the first iPhone app for Shazam as a launch product for the iPhone, and it just took off from there. So the only thing that Shazam was missing was a good user interface and a button that you could put on the home screen.
Yeah. And your role throughout this was on the tech side, because obviously then you pivoted to becoming a product manager, or did that happen in Shazam?
No, that didn't happen. So in Shazam, I sort of transitioned automatically because we didn't have, in 2001 to 3, we didn't have product managers per se here in Europe, at least.
Yeah.
So we had to take all the decisions. And so we started to research, how do we do the user interface? How do we speak to users? Do we say hello? Do we play a sound, for example? Then how do we get the user to understand that they can go online after they got an SMS, because it was an SMS at the time? How could we tell them, and you can now go online and see the history of your, the Shazam tags that you did, and how can we point them to that? How can we then connect with, a link to Amazon, for example, to go buy the music, and how can we do all that, right? So we started researching about user friction, user testing. We tried different experiments. So I got into this whole, how can we make the product the most, the easiest possible for the user, and with the most satisfaction in the least amount of time. And so I got into this whole, iteration, researching, optimizing. And so that's when then I decided, I should try and go do product management. Because I really want to get into the decision side of things, and planning out and researching and figuring out how we can make the product successful. So that's how I then transitioned.
It's interesting what you mentioned, how back in 2001, that space where in Europe, product management itself wasn't even a defined role. I guess it's good to talk about that evolution of now product managers being critical in any tech startup or tech scale up. I guess the product management kind of role and vacancy amount has just grown so much in the UK over the last couple of years. I mean, back then when companies didn't have product managers, who made these types of decisions? Because it sounds like at Shazam you had that unique opportunity of getting involved in making those decisions whilst being a techie.
So at Shazam, we were lucky because we were all of us very, very passionate about the product. So we had extremely good discussions and a lot of heated discussion late into the night about what we should do. So we were quite lucky. But I think in general, let's not look back too much, because I think the reason product managers exist and that it grew so fast as a profession is because there is a reason for them to exist, right? There's a reason for product management to exist, and I think there was a certain lack of that. So just to explain very briefly how it was, is that a lot of the times the tech team got stuff thrown at them, a little bit like, hey guys, code this. And I'm exaggerating, right? But it was a little bit in that direction. And the decisions on product, the high level ones, if you are in a bigger company, would be taken by either marketing or business strategy. And so there would be a combination of marketing, knows about the customers. Business strategy knows about the business, the cash flow, and so you would get the requests incoming, right? And so if you hear people having pain discussions around, oh my God, don't throw requirements at me again, that's probably where it came from, is that we had a whole list of requirements coming our way, but there was no, there was no consistency thinking. There was no, are we doing this correct thing for the strategy? Are we going in the right way? Is that a very sensible packaging? Are we maybe too confusing for the user? Are we not? So a lot of thinking of product thinking that goes into the products nowadays did not exist in a very formalized way. So when I switched to Google, so I was lucky enough to get a product management job at Google. It was actually amazing to see how it already worked in California and how advanced it was compared to what we were doing. So that was a moment I'll never look back on either. Same as joining Shazam, joining Google was awesome. And it just opened the doors to a lot more formality, a lot more procedure around how do you do proper user testing? How do you take away bias, for example, from the way you're asking questions? How do you ensure that the user is focused on the action and not on what you're telling them? And just a glimpse, right, on user research, for example, which was very, very eye-opening to me. And a lot of other things and product management as well, a lot of aspects of the job that I did not know were formalized like that, which was great. It was a great moment to see this. And I think the last 10 years, 12 years, have been extremely good for product management. I think there's a lot of structure now around what the job is, what the role is. There's a lot of documentation. There's a lot of networks and events you can go to. In London, you can go to Product Tank. You can go to different product meetups. And there's an understanding that you're not there just to shuffle tickets around, or that you're there for, sort of as a project guy, but you're there actually to work hard and spend your time to try to improve the product and make it successful for users.
And it's probably worth talking about that distinction between, because you still see many companies now hiring product managers, product owners, technical project managers, project managers. There's still a lot of different job titles, job descriptions being thrown around. Whereas when you're building a software engineering team, it's pretty straightforward. You're hiring a developer or an engineer who can do X, Y, and Z. Language, frameworks, separate. But within that kind of business, project, product stage, I guess from your experience, why are there so many different distinct roles? Do they actually serve different purposes?
Yeah.
Can they be merged into one?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of things. So one of the things that is very logical, for example, is that if you have a product that is consumery, that is end consumers, it's user interfaces, mobile apps, different aspects, and you have a product manager, and then you have a UX design, UX research team, you have engineering, development, you have DevOps, the whole stack, you're fine, right? So this makes sense. Then, for example, if you're if your product is an API, or one of your products is an API, then generally it makes no sense to put somebody there who has absolutely no experience, for example, coding, right? Or at least having used APIs. I mean, how would somebody know if the API, whose audience are programmers, how would they know if the API is good? How would they know if it's well done, if it's exactly what people need? How would they make sense of the feedback? If you get feedback from developers, for example, telling you, hey, the sequence of calling your API is quite annoying, actually, because we always have to do this thing. We lose 2 seconds here. We lose this. We need it for our login page. It needs to be faster. Maybe you can disconnect it and do 2 small calls, right? Whatever it is. If you don't have any sort of technical affinity, how will you How will you be, even if you want to, how will you be able to make sense of all that? So in that case, people came up with these titles that, for example, would be technical product manager. So however you call it, the goal is to have a little bit more understanding of what the technology is. I think in general, the titles are younger in product than they are in, for example, software development. So it's a little bit more wishy-washy yet still. But there are certain areas like the one I mentioned that are a bit more defined. I think the one that's currently a little bit in flux is product. You mentioned the word product owners, right? So product owners and product managers. I think that's a little bit, it depends on the company you talk to, because product owner originally was a role in Scrum that came out of Scrum, and you had a product owner that was responsible for making sure that the flow's right, that the momentum is going, that we are very clear on what we're doing. And then there's a product manager. And so some companies now hire product owners as almost product managers. And I think, the jury's out on what's better. Me, I guess I'm a bit more old school in that sense, because I think in terms of apart from now, I may get killed by several people for this, but in terms of product, you don't own anything as the product manager. If you're the person who is there to make the product successful, which means you're going to talk to sales, you're going to talk to user support, you're going to devise user research to find out what people are thinking about the product and how they're using it. If you're going to look at the data, you're going to dig into the usage patterns. If you're the person who wants to make the product successful, then you don't really own it, because if the CEO walks by and tells you, hey, I need that button moved left, then you're going to say, well, but I think my professional opinion is that it shouldn't, because here's why on the right the button is more successful, will be better for our users. And if the CEO still goes, yeah, but I don't care, I want it left, well, what choice do you have? So of course, you have the wrong CEO, because you should have a CEO that listens to you, ideally. But the point is that there's lots of other people who are actually owning the thing, and you're not just you're an owner of a something, but you don't have ultimate decision on this. And product manager, I think, is more accurate, because you're the product manager of you're the manager of that product. You shepherd it, and you take input from all the sides. You organize everyone in the best way that and that you can find, with everybody telling you how it's best done. So you have to orchestrate all of this. One good analogy I've heard was you're like the captain of an aircraft carrier. So the general is your CEO, and he says, hey, I want your aircraft carrier to go to that Mediterranean now to do these kind of support missions, whatever. And then you're orchestrating the planes, the supply chains, the stuff for cooking, everything else, the fuel supply chain, whatever. And you're orchestrating everything to be to satisfy all the tasks that you have, all the goals that you have, and be successful at it. But you're not the ultimate owner of the thing. And so I think that's why product manager was actually pretty accurate, I think, as a title. But I think to wrap it up, right? We could discuss this for ages, but to wrap it up is that it depends on the businesses. Some businesses are retail. Some businesses are technical. There's APIs and very technical backends. Some businesses are consumer finance. And so every one of those businesses, the product manager needs to be doing slightly different aspects of the job. So certain aspects are the same. So you have to develop, you have to do clean, customer approach and finding out what works and what doesn't, make your product successful, work with a company, make sure communication is flowing, everything that a product manager is supposed to do. But you have a very different industry, right? Different vertical, different use cases. So some have affinities, some don't. For me, for example, fashion is not so much my thing. To go to retail for me would be not very useful, because my heart wouldn't beat for it. So, I don't think I'd be very successful at it. But it's interesting that you're absolutely right in the sense that the titles are still a bit more in flux. I think it's still because the organizations are quite different, and different businesses bring different organizations with them. And so I have, for example, I'm talking to a company right now that does they have very big clients, and so they have this big thing where it's a small company. They have very big clients, so you have to take a lot of care about every one of these clients. You have to spend a lot of time with them, with their development teams of running pilot projects, installing software, running releasing the next version, release management. And so there's a lot of this work being done. And so the product managers are doing half product management and half project management, because the company is still not big enough to have dedicated project managers or dedicated product managers. So you would have product managers and client strategic partnerships, let's say, who would bring back some feedback from talking to the clients. But the company is so small because they're a quite early stage startup that
you have to wear many hats.
They have to wear many hats, and so they are in this situation where, as a product person, they cannot sit back and relax and do some free thinking because they always have 5 to-dos that are urgent that same day because they need to deliver this to the client, right? So it's interesting how you get into these situations where there's still a little bit of tension around all of this, and a little bit of I guess it'll shake down in the next 5 to 10 years as well.
So really it's about focusing on the business problem you have as a company and what it is you're trying to build and do, and then you work back what type of structure you need, rather than following some kind of framework of saying, well, this is how we're going to innovate. We're going to have product managers who do X, Y, and Z. You need to work off kind of what your current requirements are.
Yeah, exactly. And you need to see what stage you're in. Is it the stage where are you the famous stages? Are you 0 to 1, for example? Are you in complete bootstrap? Are you in growth mode? Do you have a product market fit, and are you in growth mode? So different people have different skills. And I may not be good at everything. I may not be good at 0 to 1. I may not be good at 1 to 10. I may not be good at 1 to 100. But I may be brilliant at 100 to a million. For example. So it's different people at different stages that can help you. For startups, for example, they tell you famously, get your advisors according to the stage you're at. So don't get an advisor, for example, from a massive corporate to help you grow at the start, to bootstrap, right? To find product market fit, because they will be able to help you with connections. They will be able to help you grow afterwards. But if they've never done themselves a phase of, having to find product market fit, you'd be better served with advisors who actually have done that already, who can help you. Try this. Have you looked at that? What about this? And so explore different avenues to actually, find a product market fit. So it's interesting. It's still in flux, and it's very much dependent on what you're trying to achieve. Yeah.
Yeah. So it'd be great to talk a little bit about Google, because Google's obviously, I guess, an amazing company, built exceptional products, really transformed, I guess, the web experience, everything from Gmail, which you worked on, Google Maps, and even now at Techruiter, we're actually using Google Pixelbooks, which obviously, when you look at the price and the technical spec, actually Google Pixelbook seems to be coming out on top, although we're getting a few little teething problems with downloading Skype and so on. But kind of going back to Google, what made Google so unique in its structure and approach that cultivated such great product innovation from your few years that you spent there?
Yeah, so many things. I think way too many to list them all. But I think there was a big drive to do things the best you could. So don't let yourself be held back by too many constraints. Try first to come up with something really different. Try to come up with something that you might think at first, oh, this is too much processing power, this is too much memory, this is too much this. But what if you could, right? What if you actually didn't have that constraint?
Think outside the boundaries.
So why are there boundaries, right? So there will be boundaries eventually, but why don't you just cook up a use case first and then see, and then see if discuss it and see if it can be done. I think that's one of the bases of it. The other thing is the engineering rigor. So product management and engineering rigor that Google put to everything was quite something to look at, right? So the code would never be checked in unless somebody else looked at it. So there was already peer reviews for everything. Back in 2006 when I started, it was already all established. You would not be able to launch unless your code scaled to 1,000 machines, and that would be tested beforehand. So there would be the DevOps team, which would run your code and literally throw it back at you if it didn't scale correctly and if it started using too many resources, and say, nope, gotta go back to the drawing board because here's the behavior as we scaled it, and there you start to have bottlenecks, and so you have to go back. So you would literally have a lot of structure around this that will help you come up with good software and in very good quality. So that was interesting. There would also be, for example, one of the famous "eat your own dog food." It's a sentence, but basically we'd use the software internally ourselves. And so, if you think teething problem are what you think a teething problem now, the first versions of everything were quite basic, and so we used them internally, and that helped them make them better. Then we launched them to a certain number of trusted testers. Then it became even better, and then you gradually launch it to everyone. And it's in a pretty solid state by the time it goes out.
Yeah, it's also the culture as well, because I've seen it in other companies who've tried to follow that mindset of eat your own dog food and tried to get people internally to download the app, to use the service, to critique it, to give feedback. But sometimes it can be like you're pulling teeth out, because the company, and maybe goes back to the talent strategy of you need to hire people that are completely vested and have that real ambition
Exactly.
to fix the company's problems, as opposed to, hey, I've just got a job just for the sake of working.
Exactly. So you're right. So a framework will never actually solve your problem, right? You can set up whatever framework you want. If it feels like you're imposing it, if it feels like if the person feels like you're slamming this, and they tell their friends in the evenings, like, oh my God, my company's forcing me to use the product, then, the question is, why are you working at that company if you don't think the product is worth it? So, hey, fair enough. It's a job. I get it. But if you're on the other side of the fence, so you're the company, and you want people to be on your team who are motivated, who are great, who are problem solvers, who are looking for solutions and looking for a way forward, and looking to extend the boundaries, to push the limits, then you actually need to work on your hiring a lot. So you need to have in place a hiring procedure that tests that, right? So I know, for example, for engineering, I can't really speak about it, but for product management recruiting, for example, at Google, which I did quite a bit, is we were looking for people. We were looking at what they would do, right? What would you actually do here? And we had these cases where people came in and then got a bit frustrated because they said, well, look, I've done so much in my life. Here's my resume. Why are we not talking about this? And the answer would be, well, your resume is great. It got you here, right? Same as me. But I want to know what you're going to do. And so you would literally have some people who would just jump at the occasion and for 1 hour, fill the whiteboard, the wall next to it, and come up with all sorts of stuff. And there'll be other people who wouldn't actually, in a framework that is, yeah, here's a whiteboard, you can do whatever you want, no limits. And some other people don't thrive in that environment. And so in your recruiting process, you need to make sure that you have explicitly steps and for people to test the sort of motivation, test the how do they approach problems? Do they like exploring? Do they like solving problems? Do they like trying new things? And how do you actually test all of that, right? So you need to have a framework in place explicitly. Otherwise,
it's taking people away from kind of their past achievements and talking about, I've done X, Y, and Z, worked in X, Y, and Z industry, to actually dig a bit deeper on their mentality and their approach and their problem-solving mindset.
Exactly. And so whatever level, whatever seniority you're at, if you're, the goal of a company like Google and Facebook and anything else is to get people on board who are going to change things, right? Who are going to make an impact, and not people who will continue their career, so to speak, but actually what will be the impact that person will have.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. No, this has been a great session. Hopefully, we've got a lot of really good business and product and tech insights. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about what you're doing now.
Ironically, you just started your business. Ironically, I had my last day at my last company last week. The company decided to change strategies, so they decided that a whole bunch of stuff they're doing, they should do something else instead. And so I'm now actually jumping into helping other people with product. The idea being that the senior product leaders are expensive, and there are not that many in the market. On the other hand, a lot of people would like a little bit of more senior product thinking. As you said earlier, right? You said a lot of the titles, for example. Why is it that it's still a bit, a little bit changing, a little bit not super defined? And the reason is exactly that, right? Is that a lot of companies don't have somebody who's done product for 10 years. And so how can I combine that? How could I find, because there is a market gap, but how could I find a way to make it work pragmatically? So I'm going to work with companies on a basis of 2 days a week or 3 days every sprint to help internally the product team, because obviously nobody will give you the product ownership if you're not internal, right? Because it's a bit different than just contracting for writing code or for designing something. So nobody will want the ownership of the product to be external, but they'd like some input about the product. So I've had a lot of chats with people, and there seems to be a market gap in coming in a very part-time basis for product. So instead of going to a company for 2 months in a block, I will go help companies over a period of 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, whatever it is. Anything from vision to strategy to converting that into a roadmap to making sure your organizational map is actually adapted to what you want to launch, making sure that you have then the right behaviors in terms of product hygiene. How are your targets set? How's your design process going? How's your development process going? How's product basically orchestrating all that, and is it working fine? All the way to what kind of targets do your product managers have? What kind of motivation they have to help you become a much better engine, have a much better engine at producing software that's actually valuable to customers, right? To have more impact. And so that's the idea so far. So help people a few days every sprint over time, depending on what the needs are. Obviously, you can only find that out once you talk to people, but that's what I'm going to do now in the coming months.
So it's taking all of your experience from Shazam, Google, the founding of your own startup, which unfortunately we didn't get a chance to talk about, but we had so much insights, and taking all of that experience and essentially productizing it and going into different businesses and giving him a little bit of that kind of insight on how should they solve problems. And again, it's different solutions for different companies, but having an advisor or a mentor who's been there, solved these problems, it helps them.
I literally, it's a fresh thing, so I can tell you in 6 months if it worked or not. But I think there's something there to help people on a part-time basis, and to help them improve, right? How can you test your new hypothesis? How can you go to the market? How can you figure out a good way of capturing all the ideas that are flying around? Because a lot of people have these things about roadmap, we're doing this, but we'd like to do the other thing, but we can't decide. And so how do you get to a point where you can decide? How can you estimate better? Where are the things that you need to, what are the things that you need to scope out? What are the unknowns? Where can you complete more data? Where do you have to do user research? So, help people really, really get much better at this. Yeah, so awesome. That's the goal, yeah.
I think in our experience over the last 2 months since we set up Techruiter, and the amount of newer early stage startups, brand new companies, individuals setting up their own businesses, there seems to be, like, London is just buzzing with new ideas, new innovation. So it's quite exciting to see in the tech and product space that hopefully we will have even more exciting tech companies coming up that obviously need product leadership as well as engineering leadership. So yeah, exciting times.
It's very exciting at the moment. Yeah, London is great. I think Berlin is amazing. I think Lisbon is coming up. Paris is amazing. There's a lot of places now for tech in Europe that are super exciting, I think.
Cool. Awesome. Brilliant. Well, great having you, Christian.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks for being on the show.
And yeah, I hope that gets people excited. So
cool. Thanks.
See you around in London.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Christian.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cool. Bye.